So the first thing you have to do when you're doing hay is you have to cut it. So I have this really nice Krone Active Mow R280, and I sort of splurged on the cutter here because these things are, I think this thing was around $11,000. And if you haven't seen my videos before, I like to tell everybody exactly what things cost. This thing, though, is really well built. It's German made. It's, you know, one of the more pricey cutters on the market. And this one, I just got the cutter and no conditioner on the back. So it's really just a disc cutter, and it's a 9-foot bar. I got a 9-foot area of cut. And my fields, I only have roughly 15 to 20 acres of hay field. So I don't need a huge cutter. This thing's got a lot of settings on it. It's a little more finicky than I thought, but once you get it dialed in, it works really well and you can go pretty fast. I would say 8 miles per hour was my sweet spot because of the bumps and things that I dealt with. But I can mow at about 8 miles per hour with this thing, maybe a little faster if I can get my field smooth. One of the things that was sort of a challenge for me with this thing is on the back of the 3-point hitch here, there's a lot of tilt that happens because you have a lot of weight over on this side. And so trying to figure out the tension of the different springs here that one hold the bottom part, this bottom bar up and sort of put more pressure on your 3-point hitch. Getting that right is important because I felt like I don't have it perfect yet. It's still tilted way too much. And then the other thing is these springs here adjust sort of the tension of the float when it's riding over the ground, how much tension. So if this thing starts bouncing a lot as you're going, you probably have too much tension on these springs. And so you just need to change your tension here, and it's done by this pin, and you can adjust where it's at on this bar here. So that took some practice and figuring out is like what's the appropriate tension so that the thing doesn't bounce. I would say that with a disc cutter that's 3-point mounted like this, it's very important to have a hydraulic top link. And the reason is you can adjust your height of your cut by making your top link longer or shorter. If you make your top link longer and it pushes out further, it tips the cutter bar back like that, and so it'll increase your cut height. If you pull and make your top link shorter, it will decrease your cut height. And you can do this with the manual top link. You'll just have to get in and out of your tractor to try to figure out, because some places you sink more if you have softer ground. Some other places you'll ride higher. Maybe there's places where you have lots of rocks or something you're worried about and you want to be safe, so you want to tip it back really far. That's really how you can adjust, because the bar has to ride on the ground, the cutter bar, with these things. There are 3 different gearboxes and oil change checkpoints and things like that on this, but it's pretty straightforward. The other weird thing is this hydraulic cylinder here is a single acting hydraulic cylinder, meaning you only have one of these fittings. So it says +1 on it, and there's on your tractor you're supposed to have like on your hydraulics on the back here, your remotes, you usually have 2, because you have double acting cylinders like this thing where there are 2 hoses going into it, and it pushes out one way and it can pull back the other way, so you can push pull a double acting cylinder. Well, since this is a single acting cylinder, the way it goes down it uses gravity to drop down, and it's basically slowly releasing the pressure, but it's not pushing it down. It just releases the pressure in the cylinder and it goes out slowly. At least that's the hope. It goes out slowly. And you want to make sure you have a tractor that can do kind of a single acting cylinder. It works fine on mine, so I'm assuming these Case 75Cs have single acting capability. I haven't really looked into it too much, but there's supposed to be like a +1 symbol on these if they're +1 enabled, which means they can do these single acting cylinders. It takes some finesse with the raising and lowering of this thing. So when you raise it up, that is hydraulic pressure that's raising it up, and basically you can see this hose here comes down to the end, and so what it's doing is you're shooting hydraulic fluid into the cylinder. It's pushing the cylinder, the core of the cylinder backwards like this. And so it pulls this whole thing up. And so raising it is smooth because you can control it nicely. Lowering it is, you're releasing pressure and then it's going back down. So the way you release the pressure and how careful you are with your levers in your tractor will determine how much this thing just goes crashes down, or if it goes down nice and smoothly and back. So here's what the cutter bar looks like. What's really neat about this thing is, you know, and most disc mowers, is this just lays on the ground and they're so quiet. These things are so quiet. It almost sounds like a fan. It doesn't sound like a real loud thing. That was a surprise to me because, you know, I'm new to doing hay and cutting hay and using these disc mowers. And I was surprised at how quiet these things are. So one cool thing about these Krones, if they hit something, the cutters raise up. These like turtle shell looking things, they raise up in the air if you hit something like a rock. And that way you don't damage the gears that are inside this bar. There's a lot of gears in here and it's all sitting in oil. And that's your expensive stuff, is all of the gearboxes and that make these things turn. So what you don't want to have happen is one of these things get jarred and then you break a gear or something inside of your cutter bar. So there's some nice protection against rocks and things. When you do a right-hand turn, your cutter bar is going to be on your inside as you're turning around the corner, and it drags in a weird shape. It doesn't do if you have a right-hand corner of your field, it sort of comes along and then the back end kicks out a little bit as the tractor's turning. So you're left with these like they almost look like little J's, little rounded corners on the edge of your field, and they get more pronounced the more times you go around. And so right hand turning with a 3-point mounted cutter like this is somewhat of a challenge because it doesn't track like a trailer would around the corner. It sort of like pivots as it's going around the corner. So doing left-hand turns when this thing's on your outside is a lot easier because then you can look out of the tractor and see exactly how you're cutting and make a nice corner. And in fact, in the manual for this thing, they suggest, so you'll see a lot of videos on YouTube for cutting hay where they say, go around the outside and then turn around and start from the outside and kind of draw a circle and go back towards the middle as you're going, cutting around. This thing, they say, go to the middle of the field and start and make a spiral that slowly goes outward. And a couple reasons for that. One, the biggest reason they give is wildlife. If you're cutting hay, there's a lot of wildlife in the field. If you start from the middle and you work your way out, the wildlife can run away and get out, and you don't trap them in the center. So that's one of the reasons they give. I also think that by doing it that way, you're making constant left-hand turns then, and then you can see this thing on your outside, and this tracks a lot better when it's on the outside of the tractor as you're making the turn than on the inside. So the next time I'm gonna mow, I'm gonna definitely do the middle with the spiral cutting out, because I started that about halfway in and I found that it worked way better. So just a tip there if you've got one of these 3-point mounted cutters. So the big downside of doing the left-hand turns though is it's tough to judge how far away, like if you're at the field edge, how far away you need to be when you make that turn, because this thing comes around and it makes a wide arc outside your tractor. So you just have to be careful if you have trees or rocks or anything that you don't smack into them on the end of your cutter here. And if you do hit something, there's this sort of pin right here that holds this together. And if you hit it, if you hit a tree or a rock or whatever, this thing moves up and over that pin and allows this whole arm to swing backwards so you don't break your tractor. Yeah, you can adjust the tension of that. If it's tripping too much on you, you can make it a little tighter, or whatever. So that's another little adjustment thing. If you're like me and you don't have a very big tractor, this is you know, it's a 75 horsepower tractor, so it's not that small, but as far as like farming goes, it's kind of small. It's on the smallest end of a tractor that you can really use for baling hay with a big round baler like that. But if you have a smaller tractor, one thing to keep in mind is these cutter bars weigh a decent amount and they're just sitting on your hitch. So if you're on a hillside and you raise this thing up, like let's say you got a hill like this and you're driving with this down the downhill side, if you raise that up, you can flip the tractor over pretty easy, because as you lift this up, it's just torquing your 3-point hitch. And so you just have to be careful that really you never lift this thing up if it's pointed downhill. Never lift it up. And what I ended up doing, because I have a lot of steep hills that I have to mow along the side of, is I just go the opposite direction where the cutter's on the uphill side, and that way you're actually making your tractor more stable, and it's really hard to flip then if it's on the uphill side. This mower is surprisingly quiet. It's the first time I've used a disc mower before, and so far I've been impressed with how quiet it is. This field I'm going to do a little different. The manual says to start in the middle and kind of do an outward spiral. I tried my drone and it's not working right now, so I'll have to get some drone footage later. I've been playing around with the speeds of this thing because this is my first time using it, so I found if I go in my top, like my travel gear, which is 3, and then in my shifter gear in 2, so it's like high gear and number 2, I'm going about 7.7, 7.8 miles per hour, and this thing seems to do pretty well. And this field's a little bit more smooth, and it's a longer straight line, so I can go a little faster. The thing I have noticed is when I do the turns, doing inside out, you really got to give yourself a lot of clearance on the outside of the field, because you can hit stuff since this is sticking out 9 feet. Just have to be careful with that. So I just slow down on the turns, and then I speed it back up when I get on the straightaways here. So this seems to be working pretty well and covering lots of ground fast. 45 minutes, and I'd say I've done about 7 acres. This is a roughly 9-acre field. Got a little bit down over there in the corner, and then a little on the edge, and it kind of goes around a little. So yeah, this thing's doing really well. I can go really fast with it, and the tractor's holding up great. It's all doing really well for the first time. So hopefully we get nice breeze and dry weather here to keep this hay dry so we can bale it. The only thing I'm not loving right now is my hitch. It's a little twisted because of the weight here, so I need to do a little bit of adjusting there, but it still cuts fine because it floats on top of the ground. But all in all, very impressed with it so far.